computer.
Wow. Okay.
Hey, welcome everybody who's watching the recording. We had an awesome introduction. We've had a great time. Too bad you missed it. All right. Um, uh, so Rachel and I were talking this morning, we're texting this morning, and she said what she wanted to do was talk about the structure of the service, um, just overall, and then drill down and just like start at the beginning and talk about what the individual prayers are doing there and what they mean. And I know Rachel's had this exact question for at least 10 years. Um, so I'm really happy to do that. As I mentioned before, I've learned a lot preparing. I've taught a lot of classes. I've never taught something like this, just an overview of the entire service. And now I think I figured out why. It's because the subject is so huge, and it touches on so many aspects of Jewish theology. It's like, where do you start? So for me, for a long time, services seemed pretty incomprehensible. It seemed like just an endless stream of words and sentences that seemed repetitious, and it was in a structure that I was completely unaware of, and it was in a language I didn't know. Um, but Jews are supposed to come to services, so I did. But and what I got out of it was maybe a feeling of camaraderie. I did feel some of the awesomeness you're supposed to feel when they open the ark or whatever, but I I wasn't sure what I was doing in terms of reading in the prayer service. And to make it worse, as I was just mentioning, it touched on so many deep aspects of Judaism that I didn't know anything about, such as like what's the nature of God? What's the point of creation? What's the point of all these prayers? Um, and Judaism is infinitely deep, and it's hard to know where even to start. But then I remembered advice that I've been giving to others when they ask me, I want to learn more about Judaism, where should I start? And the answer is that the best place to start is whatever interests you, because the main thing is to just jump in and start learning because everything is interconnected with everything else. So eventually you're going to get to everything else if you keep learning. Well, not everything, but it's I used to think I knew about 1% of Judaism. Now that I've been studying for 30 years, I think I know like 1/10 of 1% of Judaism. Um, and but as you get more and more into learning, more and more subjects will come up, and you'll start to see the interconnections between them. Okay, so that said, there's probably about maybe 2 dozen major Jewish theological concepts that um, that are useful to know in studying the prayer service. So I'm not going to go over all of them. We're going to touch on some of them along the way, but I do want to mention 2 of them. So the first one, the most obvious one, is about God language or God. What is God? I'm sure that each of us has a different perception of what God is, and that's perfectly fine because all of our perceptions are insufficient. Um, God is indescribable. So the fact that we have a perception, it's like that parable with the 5 guys the 5 blind men who are touching an elephant. Like we all see or understand part of it, but none of us is capable of grasping the whole thing. I think an analogy of, when I think of large incomprehensible subjects, I think of, you know, what's past the edge of the universe, or how did the Big Bang happen, or how did all the energy get there before the Big Bang? And it's just too immense to contemplate. So I don't worry too much about different perceptions of God. But then the question is, well, how can we talk about that? So I guess a couple of basic assumptions, at least for me, is that there's something out there. There's some sort of energy in the universe. Um, and this energy is also in every atom that's in the universe. And there's also some of that energy within each of us. Um, and somebody once described it in the following way. I thought this was a pretty cool analogy. In the discussion of nature versus nurture, um, try to imagine yourselves. I know it's impossible, but try to imagine yourselves as though you had no nurturing at all. So you had no teaching, you grew up in a Skinner black box, whatever. Um, and the question is, would you still think it's a good idea? Would you still value being a good person? Would you still want to be a good person? Would you still want to do good things? Um, does anybody want to speak to that, or I could just keep talking? If what do you
I'll,
think?
I mean, I think that a lot of times that yes, that drive would still be there. Although, I mean, to me that goes into psychology, and I think that then there are some people who would be so traumatized by the black box that they would feel very angry and want to do bad things. But I don't think that's because they're bad. I think that they still have that spark inside them of goodness. I just think they're really damaged. So, but I know you didn't really mean a black box.
Right.
That
I was just trying to, right. I was just trying to say, trying to remove all the nurture impacts we have. Um, and I guess Rachel and I see eye to eye in a lot of things. And that's how I answered the question when I had this discussion with somebody. It was somewhat similar. And and what this rabbi was explaining to me is this spark inside of us, like that's the peace of God that's in you. And that was like a whole mind explosion bender there. Um, and the spark may or may not be the same thing as neshama, which means soul. And as probably some of you know, the word neshama comes from the word breath, or the two are related. And Genesis tells us that God breathed life into the first human, and um, the idea is that the neshama is a piece of it's a pure piece of God that's in us. Um, so I'm going to be talking about I'll be using very anthropomorphic language when talking about God. I might say God wants XYZ, but it's all a metaphor it's because words don't work here. Does that make sense?
yeah.
Okay, okay, good. So I don't want people to think that I think God is uh, you know, some guy in a white beard sitting in a throne, and that's all. Those are all metaphors. Those are weak metaphors.
Beyond that one.
Right. Okay, good. Um, yeah, I know we're beyond that one, but just
But now we know that you are too. And I mean, I knew that, but they didn't.
right,
So.
right, right. Okay, so the only other concept I wanted to talk about before we actually jump in is tefillah. So for lack of a better term, we translate tefillah as prayer. And I think it's very interesting. Yeah, okay, I'm going to go off on a tangent on myself right here. Before, when I said um, uh, that not only didn't I know the structure, but I also didn't know the language. The other thing is that Hebrew doesn't really translate very well into English. Um, and I'm sure any of you who have studied some Hebrew, like, know that words just don't translate. So one of them is tefillah. The English word prayer means to ask for something, and tefillah is almost the opposite. Um, Prayer is, I guess, is in a simplistic way of, asking God to change some reality. Um, but but tefillah comes from the word, I'm sure some of you have heard this, lahitpala, which means like self-examination. So tefillah is to change us as opposed to changing God's mind about something. Um, and that's a very important concept, and we'll see, as we'll see, will come up. Um, you know, so I was away from Judaism from towards the end of high school for at least 10 years. And part of the reason was I read this iconoclastic book. People go through their teenage rebellious years, right? And this book asks the question, um, why does God need for us to thank him all the time? Why does God need our prayers all the time? Why are we supposed to praise God all the time? Like, what kind of an egotistical, self-centered God is that? And that question was like, wow, that's right. It's like, why are all these prayers? Thank you this, thank you that. You're so great. It's like, what are we doing? And why does God need that? And maybe you all already know the answer to this, but I didn't. And it troubled me for a while. And then I sort of just drifted away from Judaism for like 10 years. And then when I started dating Shauna, we were getting serious and we are thinking about getting married. Something inside of me, maybe that Pintele Yid, right, that little neshama said, you need to belong to a synagogue. So we looked in the yellow pages, picked out the first Reform synagogue there was, and we went to it. And the rabbi, there was a special young adult service, so we went to that one. And I don't remember anything about the services. What I remember is at the end of services, he had a group discussion. This is the honest truth. The first thing he said was that exact question. He said, why does God need us to thank him all the time? Why are we praising God all the time? What are we doing? And I was like, this is amazing. This is my question. I was like on the edge of my seat. And then he gave such a simple answer. I was like, I felt really foolish. He said, God doesn't need that. He said, we need that. It's for us. I was like, duh. It's like, so I learned two things that night. One was the answer to my question, but the other was that if you don't know something, you should ask somebody. They might know. Okay, um, so I forgot where I was with that.
Those were the two concepts before you dive in.
Right, tefillah, right. Okay, so to close out my introductory remarks, is that my goal this evening is that something, anything along the way speaks to you, so that the next time you go to services, it'll at least be a little bit more meaningful. Um, like anything else, yoga, tennis, whatever, it takes practice and, repetition and learning. But the more you do and the more you learn, the more meaningful it will be. And I guaranteed, guaranteed. Um, and as I like to say, and I first heard this from my rabbi, when you're at services, your goal isn't to turn pages, it's to have the pages turn you. Now, that seems like a cute phrase, but it's very spot on. And that's the point of all this. That's the point of tefillah, is to change us, not to right. So when you go through, when you're at services next time, if there's a prayer that grabs you, stay with it, ignore what everybody else is doing. I mean, within some limit, but stay with it and seek out the meaning, or let it touch you, and hopefully when you know this structure that we're just about to talk about, it'll be easier to find meaning in some of the prayers. Okay, I think we're ready. And please feel free to stop me and ask questions along the way. Okay, so uh, people have these sheets, I presume.
You.
Okay, and I'm going to be referencing the prayers with page numbers, so the people have Siddurim.
Yes,
Okay,
most do at least. We can
okay,
share.
good. So here we go. Shabbat Shacharit prayer service. Um, I speak in a different accent than you guys. I speak the Shabbos Shacharis. I'll try to speak in your dialect, but I'll probably
Translate. Yeah, it's okay. We can translate.
okay. Right. Okay. So the first thing to know is that the Shabbat services are different from the weekday services. And the other thing that's unique about the Shabbat services is each one is different than the other. So Shabbat Friday night service is has some key differences between it and the Shabbat morning services. Um, even within like a section, for example, both of them have the Shema and its blessings, but the blessings are different between the night and the day. And the Amida is also different from the Friday night to Saturday morning. And that last thing I just said about the Amida changing is actually not true in any other day of the year. So if you go to if you go on a regular day, if you go on a holiday, the Friday night Amida is the same thing as the Saturday morning Amida, but that's not true with Shabbat. Shabbat is like its own wholly unique flavors and things going on. So what I'd like to do is first just mention the first four boxes on the top line. Um, the one might say that the whole purpose of the first three boxes is to get to the fourth box. The Amida is our encounter with God, so to speak. That's when we're talking with God. Um, and everything up until then, in a sense, is to get us in the right frame of mind. And I know that's like 45 minutes of, I don't know how long, I don't remember how long your services were, but that's, like 45 minutes versus of prep work just to get to the Amida. Um, and each section is separated by a Kaddish, with one exception, which we'll get to. And we'll talk about why the Kaddishes are there. We'll get to that. Um, but I think that's the first most important thing to know is that until you get to the Torah service, there are four different sections that serve four different purposes. So the four sections really are so the morning blessings really accomplish the idea of gratitude. Um, the second box, Pesukei de Zemra, as I wrote in there, verses of praise. That's praising God. The third one is actually the Shema. Actually, isn't a prayer. It's more a declaration. So we're declaring that we accept God for to be the I don't know what's the ruler. I don't know what the right noun is there. We're accepting God's sovereignty. And then the fourth box, the Amida or the Shemona Esrei, which in classical rabbinic literature, actually, this is what's called Tefilla. That is like our private audience with God. And that's why in more traditional services during the Amida means to stand. So you're supposed to, because like if you're in front of the king, in front of the ruler, you stand as you're talking to him. Okay, so we'll dive into the what some of the morning blessings are and what they mean and their meaning to that. Um, but I wanted to stop and ask if there's any questions.
My only my only question is if there's a shortish answer, what does it mean to say that the Shema is not a prayer? Like what's the difference between a prayer and a not prayer?
That's a good question. I have to think about that. I mean, we're not most prayers are either we're saying something. That's a great question. Good for you. Uh,
You can get back to us on that one.
yeah, Richard Feynman, who won a Nobel Prize, used to say when he came home from elementary school, his mother would not ask him, "What did you learn today?" His mother would ask him, "Did you ask any good questions today?" And Judaism's all about asking questions. So yeah, I'll have to think about that one. But yeah, so everything else. Well, okay, yeah, I'm gonna pass. Good for you. Good for you. The first thing that comes to mind is it doesn't fit any other categories, but that's not a good enough answer. Okay, so we'll go with the morning blessings. We'll start with Moda Ani. Let me just see what page that's on. So I don't know which Siddur you have. There's a Mishkan Tefilla. There's one that's just for Shabbat and one that is more encompassing.
Said 68 for us.
Page 68 in the Mishkan Tefilla for Shabbat. This short
Okay.
one.
Oh, good. Okay. That's the page I have. All right. So I said the whole morning blessings thing is about gratitude, um, being thankful for what we have. And I think Muta'ani is one of my favorite prayers, even though it's the shortest one. It doesn't even mention God by name. And that is because um, every single day of my life, I have successfully woken up. And because of that, it is so easy to take that for granted, right? I mean, it's of all the things to take for granted, the fact that we successfully woke up this morning, I think an, is amazing. And it's so taken for granted. So that's why Modani is one of my favorite prayers. So this is the beginning of being thankful for things that we have. And I think there's a cool thought tied to the very last two words. Rabba Amunatecha, um, is that is is that we're telling God, again, very anthropomorphic here, we're telling God that you have great faith in us. Really, I mean, that's what the words say, right? How great is your trust? How great is your trust in us? There's an idea in Judaism that um, I guess if any of you are old enough, there was in the 60s, there used to be a phrase in the black community to help build esteem among black kids, and the idea was God don't make no junk. Anybody ever hear that? Right. So there's an idea in Judaism that God wouldn't waste his or her time putting a neshama into a body if you weren't important, because that would be a waste otherwise. So you are important. Um, and the fact that you woke up this morning means you're still important. And God has faith in you that whatever your mission is, that you're going to work on it, that you're going to do it. And I think among the other things I'm going to do tonight is just put just mention some questions that you can ask yourself when you encounter the prayer. So one of the questions, actually a lot of them in the beginning are going to be the question of, okay, God put his trust in me. So the question is, well, in order to do what? What am I going to do today in order to justify the trust, the fact that I woke up this morning? Okay, I'm going to skip page 70 for now. I mean, those are sort of additions that just help get you in the mood and really aren't part of the classical service. Um, I will mention that now I'm going on too many tangents. Um, and there's the bracha of talit. I'm going to skip that for now also, um, just in the interest of time, and it's fairly self-explanatory. The next thing I want to do is on page 74, Ma Tovu. Um, there's an interesting idea that in these verses, if you look deeply enough, the verses are really talking about or referencing some a little bit obliquely about three different things. And it's talking about place, person, and time. Um, and one of the things that's amazing when the reason why we generally, this is the first thing that's said, it's often one of the first main things that's said in a synagogue. When you go into the synagogue in the morning, you are at a confluence of three ideal situations. You're in the best place, generally speaking, you're in the best place, meaning you're surrounded by a community of like-minded people. You're in a good place to pray. Um, uh, Person is yourself. Hopefully, you're in a good frame of mind, or you'll get to be in a good frame of mind to pray, and also um, you're praying at a good time, which is as one of the lines here. It says, "As for me, may my prayer come to you, Hashem, at a favorable time." There are specific times when we're supposed to do these prayers. You're supposed to do the Shacharis prayer in the morning, right, and the Mariv prayer at night, for example. Um, and in fact, if you were the only synagogue in town, because up until a couple hundred years ago, that's the way it was. There's only one synagogue in town. And if you were praying by yourself, you're supposed to pray when your synagogue is praying. You're supposed to synchronize those times. So matovu, among other things, is an expression that you're at the intersection of a good place and a good time and hopefully a good frame of mind um, to to do these prayers. Okay. Another awesome prayer is on again, these are all you'll get the hang of it by now, right? These are all the appreciation prayers. Um, this one, Asher Yatzar, about praying for physical health or being appreciative of the fact of physical health. Um, Traditionally, this is said the first time after you go to the bathroom in the morning, when you come out of the bathroom, traditionally it's said at that point. And so I remember once hearing a criticism about this prayer. It's like, well, what if you're not healthy? How does this prayer have any meaning? And I think it goes a little bit deeper than that. It's not just being healthy, but there's a line in here that said, "It is well known before your throne of glory that if one of them, all the pathways and openings, be wrongly opened or closed." And in the Hebrew, it's saying the things that are supposed to be open aren't open, and the things that are supposed to be closed aren't closed, then we wouldn't be able to live. And as we get older, we begin to appreciate that, right? Anybody who's had a blockage in their bloodstream or a blockage or any gastrointestinal problem, this is exactly what that's talking about. That, if you have a blockage in your artery, you're only going to last a couple more, usually, you're only going to last a couple more seconds. If you have a complete blockage of your intestines, that's fatal unless you have some surgery, or unless it undoes itself, right? Um, so that's really what this prayer is about. My son, he majored in psychology, and one of his classes he had to take a, a biology course on the brain, and he used to say, "How could anybody study the brain without thinking that God must have done this?" And I think, if we think about the miracle that the body is of just so many complicated things, how it all works out, how it's all balanced for the most part, that it's a miracle. So we're being thankful for that. And the very last line, uh, when it says, "Blessed are you who heals all flesh, working wondrously." So heals all flesh. I mean, the fact that we can cut ourselves and it heals by itself is pretty amazing. Many things in our body just fix themselves, which, we're sort of used to that. But, we have a cold or this or that, and just get better or even after we have surgery, the fact that the scars heal and it gets put together is amazing. Um, the last two words, "working wondrously," is really an oblique reference to the next prayer, which is sort of saying this, which is sort of the same prayer, but it's about our neshama, it's about our spiritual life. And what these last two words are saying is that not only is your body a miracle, but it's also a miracle that your neshama can be in your body, that the neshama and the body are uniting to be a whole person here. So I'll mention, just look at the first couple words, right? My God, the soul you have given me is pure. That's in reference to the idea, right? The neshama is a piece of God and it's pure. I want to talk about the next couple words. You created it, you shaped it, you breathed it into me. So we already talked about the breathing part. If you look in the Hebrew on the third line, it says "ata barata," and the word "bara" is almost always reserved for when God creates something out of nothing. It's a pretty rare word. Uh, it's used in the beginning of the beginning of the Torah when Hashem created the world. The word bara is there because he created something out of nothing. And I apologize for using the male language there. It's just old habits are hard to come by. Um, and and you shaped it. Yatsar is when you
Ah,
here's my cat, and he already knocked over my glass of water. Of course, of course.
Right here too.
yeah, I put her out actually.
Okay. So you shaped it. Yatsar is when you create something out of something. So now it's very interesting is Nachmanides. So he was living in the 1300s in Spain, and he described creation um, and the use of these words as something that is very similar to what physicists now say the Big Bang was like. In that first there was the Big Bang, that's something out of nothing, and what physicists say is that all these subatomic particles, ended up coalescing to regular subatomic particles like electrons and protons, and then atoms got formed and this and that, and that's sort of how Nachmanides describes um, what creation was is that that um, I mean that sort of describes what classical Judaism says about creation, that Hashem created first some materials, and then from those materials created the rest of the world. So, um, again, we might look at the creation story as a metaphor, and maybe it's intended as a metaphor because who can really explain the Big Bang? But, at least according to Nachmanides, who was writing at a time when everybody, I mean, until 120 years ago, everybody thought the universe was just static and existed, and it always was. And they sort of made fun of the Jews to think that there was an actual start or they made fun of the Torah to think that there was actually a beginning of the universe. In any event, so when it says you created it, you shaped it, it's sort of referring to two things. You created the neshama out of nothing. You shaped the body out of particles. And then when it says you breathed it into me, this is talking about the unification of the soul and the body. So again, it's going to be repetitive by the time we get to the end of this section. Again, it's just gratitude and being thankful that we have a neshama and a body that seems to work together. And again, as you're going through it, if you want to linger on this prayer when you're in synagogue, you can ponder the amazing situation we have, that we have an neshama, we have a consciousness, and we have a body, and the two usually work together. I know Rachel, the psychologist, can tell you all the times they don't work together, but okay. On page 80, we have thank you for the daily miracles. Now, what's interesting about this, I actually want to take issue with one comment that's on the bottom of that page. It says, though they are intended literally, we may perceive each blessing spiritually. I don't think they are intended literally at all. Um, I think, I mean, they are intended. I think they're intended. Let me erase that. I think they are intended both literally and figuratively, and I think that was the intent. So let me give you an example. Well, no, I'll get to that in a minute. These prayers were actually the ideal way to do them is to say them as you are getting up in the morning. So the first prayer, which says, who has given the mind the ability to distinguish day from night, that's something you're supposed to do when you wake up. After you say Modani, you're supposed to say that. And then when you open your eyes, you say the second one, right? Who opens the eyes of the blind, right? We can't see when we're asleep. So when we open our eyes, then you say it there. And then the first time you actually move a limb, past, besides your eyelids, once you move anything else, that is who frees the captive because we can't move when we're sleeping. I mean, we move unconsciously when we're sleeping, surely, um, but free the captive also, um, so it has to do with our own body being captured by our sleep. And it also has to do, I think you can look at it more expansively. We are captive by our habits all the time. Can we break out of our habits? Can I not check my Twitter feed first thing in the morning? That's a hard habit for me to break. All right. So those, uh, so all of that is encompassed, I think, by who frees the captive. And I can go on and go through each one. Um, lifts up the fallen. I forget exactly when you say that. It strengthens our steps on the next page. That's when you take your first step. Who clothes the naked? You say that, right, when you're getting dressed. And very early on, um, before the advent of the printed book, people really didn't know these prayers. So even as early as the 1500s, the rabbinical writers were talking about how um, we say these prayers in synagogue because not everybody has access to a Siddur, and maybe you don't know how to say all these prayers. So these prayers ended up people say them at synagogue, but they were originally written for the process of waking up and getting out of bed and being thankful that we were able to do that. Okay, what are we up to? So, um, if anybody has any questions on any of the specific ones, at any point, you can feel free to ask them. But
I read
um,
something about who made me in the image of God. I had read that it used to be that you were supposed to say, for making me a man, or for making me according to your plan. So I'm a little curious about if you know anything about that history or the shift.
Yeah, I'm on Tefilla and it says, "Who did not make me a woman."
Yes, yeah.
And then the alternative for women is to say, "He made me according to his will."
I just think it's an interesting
That's
change
really
to
interesting.
say made in the image of God.
Yeah.
I was wondering if that was going to come up. And I notice it's not in your Siddur, but I am prepared with an answer. So there's one classical explanation. Well, so first of all, I realized that I realized the gender of you all and the gender of me. So I really don't want to come off as mansplaining, what this is about. And it's funny, I once actually taught a half-hour class just on that prayer. And that particular day, it's the truth. That particular day, it was all women that happened to show up. It's like, so again, it's like I don't want to mansplain, but I'll say two things. So one classical explanation that's been around for at least 1,000 years is that the progression of and I forget the order, hasn't made me, that you haven't made me a slave, you didn't make me a woman, and I forgot the third one, you made me a Jew. The idea there is that a male Jew has more mitzvahs that they have to do, and a mitzvah is a way to be connected with God. And so if I have more mitzvahs that I have to do, then I'm happy to do them. Um, I I realize that's not a very satisfying answer. Um, but that's a classic answer. But I happened upon um, about 10 years ago, I heard a lecture on this subject, which I really loved. Um, so the first question is there, and I'm not even talking about Judaism, just talking about society in general, is there such a thing as male privilege? Just ask you for a thumbs up or well,
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, yes, there is.
I do think it's complicated though.
I realize thumbs up is ambiguous. Not that you're happy about male privilege, but yes, you agree that there is male privilege. So what he was saying was, imagine what male privilege was like 2,000 years ago, right? Um, so a man writing a prayer is going to be pretty thankful he's a man. And his view, I don't know how widespread this is, but it's something that actually I've felt because I've been sensitive to that prayer for a while. Is that the first step towards eliminating male privilege is to recognize that it exists. Now, I can't say how many men actually think that when they say it. I've actually never asked anybody. But that's something that I felt before I heard this explanation. So I was really happy to hear this explanation. So, I don't know if you buy it or not. Yeah, I don't know if it's satisfying at all, but but that's what the prayer means to me. That, you know, I recognize, I recognize that there is male privilege. I recognize that if I were a woman, I'd have this chip on my shoulder and I'd need therapy to deal with it. And that I'm happy that I don't have to deal with that. I'm happy that I haven't been judged for 50 years on my looks like women are. Men don't have that hardly at all. So, um, so that's what the prayer means to me. Take it for uh, take it for what it's worth.
I appreciate the extra insight on that because I know for me, I'm non-binary, so the change suits me well. Now that it says made me in the image of God, it's like, oh, okay, great. But then when I found out that was underneath, I thought, well, so what is the prayer actually trying to say? So that really helps me.
Well, good, good. Yeah, and I think maybe in the image of God is always a good thing to say. I'm not. I have a bias towards changing prayers, but that is an awesome thing to say. And I think it's important to recognize. Let me put it this way. I think the importance of being made in the image of God is to recognize that everybody else is also made in the image of God. I mean, then it becomes a very important statement. There's a whole discussion, right? Love your neighbor as yourself. So there's a whole discussion among the commentaries, like, how could you possibly fulfill that mitzvah? Of course, we're going to care more about ourselves. Again, citing Nachmanides, he goes so far as to say as well, it's an exaggeration. It doesn't mean it literally. But some of the Hasidic masters say, no, 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 it is meant literally. And this is what it means. It means you need to recognize that just like you have a piece of God inside of you, that somebody else does too. And that's what you need to love. So I think the B'Tselem Elohim is a really awesome expression. And it affirms the humanity of every person. And like I was saying before, God don't make no junk. There's something important and positive about every person. Sometimes you have to dig pretty deep to find it, right? Sometimes a person has to dig deep within himself to find it. But we take it on faith that it's there somewhere. There's something good in there. There's a piece of God in there somewhere. So I think that's a wonderful prayer.
Mrs. Shauna, I said I wasn't going to interrupt, but I do. I just want to add one little thing. This has been an awesome discussion, but with the first answer that Shalom offered about the language, the unfortunate, thank God didn't make me one. The idea about men have to do more mitzvahs in traditional Judaism, and that connects them with God more. It's actually a feminist thought, because the reason that men have to do stuff, go be part of a minyan, is because they are not on as spiritually elevated a level as women are. So in that, even in that sexist seeming tradition, women are seen as much more naturally oriented towards doing the right thing, much more naturally spiritual. We don't need trappings. We don't need extra stuff to get us in line with God and thinking about doing the right thing and in connection with what God is interested in us doing. So it really is actually, even though it sounds like a sexist thought, it's really more of a feminist thought. Just wanted to add that.
Thank you. Thank you. Actually, Rav Hirsch in the 1800s wrote about that in his commentary. Well, it was commentary on something. That's why that's the classical explanation of why men have to wear a kippah and women don't, because men need to be reminded that God is above us, and women don't need to be reminded so much. And we see all over in the Torah, we see, right, when Avram and Sarah when Sarah wants to throw Ishmael out of the camp, and Avram turns to God, and Avram is Mr. Chesed, so he's like, Mr. Loving Kindness. He turns to God and says, "What should I do?" And God says, "Listen to Sarah in all of her words." And what's interesting there is God could have just said, "Listen to Sarah." He said, "Listen to Sarah in all of her words." It's like she's more spiritually in tune. And we see in the next generation with um, Isaac and Rebecca, right? Yitzhak and Rivka, right? Yitzhak, Isaac wants to bless Esau. And Rivka understands, Rebecca understands, no, 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 no. You need to bless Yaakov here. You need to bless Jacob. She's the one who gets it, and she's the one, like she's tuned in to what God wants, and he isn't. And again, we see with I hope this doesn't sound like apologetics. Again, we see with the sin of the golden calf that the men were involved and the women weren't, and that's why women were given the holiday of Rosh Chodesh to celebrate the month. So there are hints all throughout Jewish history of what Shana just said, that women are just on a higher spiritual plane. In fact, uh, that's that's really the reason why um, in traditional Judaism, the religion follows who the mother is. So some people say, oh, it's because you don't really know who the father is. But that's not the reason, because what tribe you are, if you're a Kohen, if you're a Levi, whatever, what tribe you are, and tribes are a lot more important than follow the father. Um, but the spiritual growth of a person seems to, the mother's Judaism posits that the mothers nurture the spirituality better. So the religion needs to follow the mother. Okay, I'm getting way off track here, but
Sholom,
yeah.
just because I don't know about what people are doing after, I just want to give a time check of we have 12 minutes.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, I'm sorry it took so long at the beginning.
It's not very interesting. It's not apologize.
Okay, thank you. I guess let me just skip to Kaddish, because I know Rachel specifically had that question when we had some conversations. Why are there so many Kaddishes, and how come it's in between every section? I think that's a great question. Um, So let me just first point out there actually is one exception to that rule. Between the third section, Shema and its blessings, and the fourth section, the Amida, there is no Kaddish. And the reason is that the Shema, the blessings before and after Shema, and even in the Shema itself, talk about the three most important, maybe historical events in the world, from the Jewish point of view, talks about creation. The first bracha of the Shema is creation. The second bracha is about revelation, the fact that we got the Torah, Mount Sinai. Then the bracha after that is about redemption. It actually talks about it talks about a little bit of the Song of the Sea, that God saved us from, crossing the Red Sea, right? We say Mi Chamocha and Baruch Atah Goal Yisrael, who redeems Israel. But it's really talking about the redemption. The hint is to the redemption in the future. What do I mean by redemption in the future? I think the best, I wrote out the quote, so I would say it accurately. I can't find it now. I love this quote by Martin Luther King. He said, I'm sure most of you know this one. He said something like, the arc of moral.
But it bends. Oh, the arc of
Moral
history is
universe.
long, but it bends towards justice. The arc of
Right,
the moral universe. Thank you.
right. Thank you. Right. So that's what Judaism believes, that at the end, whatever the end means, there's going to be justice and fairness. Things are going to be good when we get to the end. We could talk about whether, it means literally Mashiach is coming, a Messiah is coming, or the Messianic times, but there's light at the end of the tunnel. And it's considered that's considered so important that we want to connect that idea to the Amida when we actually talk to God. So we don't have a Kaddish in there, but we have a Kaddish in all the other parts. So, so what's the big deal of Kaddish? Um, the importance of Kaddish. So the original Kaddish, it wasn't even related to mourners. It was just not just, it was a praise of God. And it contained a very important sentence, which might be, along with the Shema, it might be the most important sentence of the service. And that's when we say, Yehei Shmei Rabba Mavarach, may his great name be blessed. So what does that sentence mean? May his great name be blessed. So, and actually, I think we say it right at the end of Aleinu, B'yom Hahu, Ushmo Echad, right? Let his name be one. So, what is this with God's name? First of all, so when we talk about God's name and we want the whole world to know God's name, what we're really saying is that we as Jews want to fulfill the idea that we are a light unto the nations. The fact is that we did get the Bible first, right? Before the other main religions in the Middle East, right? Before Islam, before Christianity, the Jews got the Bible first. And the idea is that we need to be role models. We need to be upstanding in justice, and hopefully other people recognize it, and then we'll recognize the appropriateness or recognize that justice is an ideal. Um, Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, who is one of the all-time great rabbis of contemporary times, I think he died. He died about 5 years ago. Um, he had this video. It's called, something like the top 10 hard questions of Judaism, and he answered each one in about 2 minutes. It was unbelievable. These were really hard questions. So one of the questions was actually, I'm not sure if this is in the video, but one of the questions is, if we're God's chosen people, why are we suffering so much? Why are we like scattered all over the earth? Why is it so hard to just own a little piece of land? And for most of our history, we haven't owned any land. I think there's a joke somewhere. It's like, I think Tevye maybe says it in Fiddler on the Roof. Like, I wish, if God could have just chosen somebody else, some other people,
Yeah, yeah.
something like that. So very quickly, what it means to be chosen people is that we were chosen to get the Bible first, and then be exemplars to the rest of the nations. And Jonathan Sacks makes the observation that Jews are a living proof that might doesn't make right. Right? In the whole rest of the history of the world, like the winners by force are the ones that impose their will on everybody. Right? The Roman Empire, right? I mean, all the empires, to this day, right? It's because of how, right, the U.S. hopefully, ideally, is supposed to be an exemplar of democracy, but that's in part because we're able to win World War II. Um, but but Jews show a way of uh, Jews are, as I said, Jews are living proof that we can be right, even though physically and dominatingly we're weak, right? There's only You ask anybody, what do you think the percentage of Jews are in the United States? You'll get like wild numbers. Or you ask people, what's the percentage of Jews in the world? We are far less than 1/10 of 1%. And yet everybody thinks we're important. Um, and that's because of the ideas we have. And one of the ideas that Martin Luther King picked up on is that, and I guess Christianity picked up on, although I don't know a whole lot about Christianity, is that the arc of justice in the universe is event or the arc of whatever the moral arc is eventually going to turn. It bends slowly, but towards justice, or whatever the quote was. That we believe that there's going to be a good ending at some point. So the idea of Yehi Shemei Rabbah, of making, literally, it means making God's name great. That's what that encompasses. It encompasses that we are going to be a light unto the nations, and everything we do reflects on Judaism. And, especially if you walk around looking like I do, everything I do reflects on Judaism and indirectly reflects on what I think of God and what other people think that the Jews think that God thinks, or and that we need to be careful of what we do, and that we hope one day other people will come to right. We're not a converting religion. We don't necessarily need to convert people to Judaism, but we do want people to believe in fairness and loving kindness and justice and truth. Um, and that's what is all encompassed. All of what I just said for the last 5 minutes is part of what Yehei Shemei Rabbah means. And it's considered such a holy sentence that you can only say it like when there's 10 people. And in this special prayer that they made into Aramaic so that to make sure everybody understood it. It's one of the few prayers. It's not in Hebrew, it's in Aramaic. Um, so it's considered like the all-time great prayer. Um, so we say it for we say it between each section as a reminder of that, and as a demarcation that we're moving from one section to the other. And so the original prayer was Chatzi Kaddish, which literally translates, it means half Kaddish, but it's the original Kaddish. And that's the short Kaddish we say. And then what happened was we added on to it. Um, we added parts onto it because all right. Sorry, I'm gonna just take a couple more minutes here. So it used to be that somebody who's mourning, for them to get other people to say Yehei Shmei Rabbah was a big merit. So a mourner would lead services. And what happened was, especially during the Middle Ages, um, when Christians came through and killed so many people, there were so many orphans that they couldn't divide up all the services among all the people who wanted to lead services and get people to say Yehei Shmei Rabbah. So they added in more Kaddish, or they added in a mourner's Kaddish, so that even though the mourner would not be able to lead services because there were too many people that needed to lead services, they could at least say a Kaddish and get everybody to say Yehei Shmei Rabbah. So that's a little bit of the background of Kaddish, and that's why we say Kaddish between each section, with that one exception. And that's why there are different kinds of Kaddish, although I think in your Siddur there
Two
are just two kinds.
leaders and learners.
I think in a traditional Siddur there are four different kinds of Kaddish, but they all start the same way. They all start with that Chatzi Kaddish, which was the original prayer. All righty.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you.
I know. It's like, yeah.
You're very welcome. And if you have any other questions, or comments, feel free to, through Rachel, you can contact me, and we'll be in contact. And Again, I want to thank you. First, you should pat yourselves on the back for coming. You should pat yourselves on the back for sitting through the whole thing. Somebody told me, don't talk the whole time, make it interactive. And I don't think I did that, but I hope I held your interest enough. And
Absolutely.
I also want to thank you for letting me, because of this, I understand the prayers better, um, which is always a good thing. We have a saying, all learning is good learning when it comes to Judaism. So thank you very much for helping my learning.
Thank you.
Learn something, and remember, next time you're at synagogue, just at least you know the structure, and if anything grabs you, just hold on to it and dwell on it and meditate on it, and hopefully we'll all raise our spirituality a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank
Thank
you.
you
Thank you
so
very
much,
much.
Shalom. Thank you,
Yeah.
Shalom, for being there too.
Yeah.
Thank you both.
Super helpful.
I'll talk to you soon, Shalom.
Okay, thank you.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Thanks.
Wow.